Um, Thank you for joining us for today's EPA Tools and Resources webinar. My name is Lisa Matthews with EPA's Office of Research and Development. Today's webinar is going to highlight the CompTox Chemicals Dashboard. The dashboard is a first-stop shop for chemistry, toxicity, and exposure information for over 875,000 chemicals. Data are being added on an ongoing basis, and new releases of the dashboard occur at least twice a year. And so we're going to talk about some of the new information today. If you have a science question during or after the presentation, please type it into the chat pod at any time. And once the presentation ends, we will answer as many questions through the chat pod as time allows. You can listen through your computer speakers or the phone line. Once the presentation starts, we're going to mute all lines to cut down on background noise. And for the speakers and the presenters, it is #6 to unmute. Okay, so at this time, I want to turn it over to Joe Teege, who is the Deputy National Program Director for EPA's Chemical Safety for Sustainability Research Program. Joe is going to briefly introduce today's topic and introduce our presenter, Maureen Gwinn. Joe?
Thank you, Lisa. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to provide the background information and kind of build the context for the presentation you're going to see here. So as Lisa mentioned, I'm the Deputy National Program Director for the Chemical Safety for Sustainability National Research Program, which is housed in the Office of Research and Development at EPA. And I'm going to refer to it as CSS. We'll start with our first acronym of the day, I suppose. The primary role of the CSS program is to conduct research to support the many chemical safety evaluation activities that occur in the agency, and with our focus being mostly upon the toxics, pesticides, and endocrine disruptor programs. But we support other programs as well, including CERCLA and water, and also our regions. And due to the fundamental nature of much of our research, and I think this will come across today in Maureen's presentation, this information is often relevant to our external stakeholders as well, states, tribes, and other stakeholders. So the major objective of the CSS program is to develop data, information, tools, and models that will enable our partners and stakeholders to make better informed and more timely decisions on chemicals. It's a diverse program, but one area that is highlighted today is our effort to provide what we call solutions-based translation in knowledge delivery. And an essential part of this is to build knowledge infrastructure, including digital systems and digital content, to support decision-making. Among the many efforts in that domain, our flagship effort by far is the CompTox Chemicals Dashboard, which you'll be introduced to today. Today's speaker is Dr. Maureen Gwinn, and she's going to provide the overview of the dashboard. She is currently the Senior Science Advisor at the National Center for Computational Toxicology in the Office of Research and Development. And her focus is on research translation of alternative toxicity testing approaches, particularly as they relate to hazard characterization and risk assessment. Dr. Gwinn became a diplomat of the American Board of Toxicology in 2007 and a member of the Academy of Toxicological Sciences in 2014. So with that, Maureen, please take it away.
The leader has muted your line. To unmute your line, press #6.
Thank you, Joe. Sorry, I just had to unmute the line, make sure it it took. Thank you, Joe. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you to Lisa and Aaron and others for inviting me and putting together this presentation today to talk about the CompTox Chemicals Dashboard. So as Joe mentioned, my area is coming at this from translating the computational toxicology work that we do here in the Office of Research and Development, particularly for hazard characterization and risk assessment. And so as I go through the slides today, it'll be to highlight some of the updates to the dashboard that Lisa mentioned since last August, August 2018, not last month, and to do it in a way of how I would use the dashboard and how I came in as a user. So I'm looking at this more from an end user perspective. And with that in mind, I have just an ask of the group. As I go through the slides, whether you're currently a user of the dashboard or you're thinking it might be something you could use in your day-to-day work, to think about what I'm presenting and how the dashboard looks to you as I go through it, how you could maybe use it for day-to-day work or how we could improve it to make it more usable for you. So those are just things we could hopefully have time to talk about at the end of this presentation as part of the question and answer section. So the first is, why does the dashboard exist? So the problem that many of us are aware of is that there are too many chemicals and too few resources. And so this is addressed in a lot of ways. We recently have been talking about the need for new approach methods or non-animal methods to try and to acquire more chemical toxicity data for both human health and environmental or ecological risk assessments. But then once you start acquiring more of that data, you have a lot of data to work with. And how do you bring that all together in a way that can be used quickly and easily and efficiently for risk assessment activities. So the dashboard, it was designed in part to address that. So it's a timely characterization of the human and ecological risk for thousands of chemicals in the environment is an important and critical challenge for us as we're trying to protect public health and the environment. So the graph on the left is from 2015, but it shows the significant growth of chemicals added to the CAS registry number list. So from 2005 to 2015, there were over 75 million entries to this registry, which is triple the number added during the first 4 years that the registry existed. And so it just highlights that the exponential growth that we're seeing in the number of chemicals being added for potential use, but also potential exposure in the environment. And the graph on the right just shows that we have a lot of data available on many chemicals, but a lot of it is in specific toxicity classes. So we have 60% of chemicals on various EPA lists or lists of environmental chemicals due to either the chemical class or the potential exposure have acute toxicity data, but only about usually less than 30% for the other types of data for cancer, gene tox, developmental tox, and others. And this is important information to have because not only does the compilation of the data on these environmental chemicals, not only is it helpful to help inform risk assessments, but it also helps inform research and development. It shows us where the data gaps may be for specific chemicals or chemical classes. So this is where the CompTox Chemicals Dashboard can come in and help address some of that. So as Lisa mentioned, the approach is to develop a first-stop shop for data as an integration node for environmental chemical data to support EPA and partner decision-making. And so what we wanted to create and what I think we've done a good job in creating is a centralized location for relevant chemical data. It includes chemistry, exposure, hazard, and dosimetry data. And it's a combination of both existing data and as well as predictive data models. So you'll see as we go through here that you'll have the option to look at traditional data, measured laboratory data, but you can also look at what our predictive models may have come up with for some of the same endpoints, or also what the predictive models can come up with to address data gaps that might be needed for screening or prioritization of various chemicals. We also wanted everything to be publicly accessible and periodically updated and curated. And the curated part is an area of importance, particularly if you're using these data sources for regulatory decision making. You need we need to be very clear as to the data quality, and the curation efforts will help address that. And then finally, we also wanted ease of access to data results to be efficient so that it would accelerate the pace of chemical risk assessment, which is sort of where I came into starting to use the dashboard, was trying to help inform risk assessment, at least informing where I wanted to focus a risk assessment or hazard characterization on. So what is the CompTox Chemicals Dashboard? Hopefully everyone on here is a longtime user. Big fan. So it is a publicly accessible website, and as Lisa mentioned, right now it has over 875,000 chemicals with related property data, as well as chemical and exposure data. This is updated regularly, as Lisa mentioned, and so in the past year or so, since August of 2018, we've added 110,000 chemicals to this list. It includes both, as I mentioned, experimental and predicted data. It includes physicochemical property data, as well as toxicity and other data. So it includes integration of biological assay data for thousands of chemicals, and with each iteration, we are able to increase how many chemicals and how much biological assay data we're able to include. It also includes information regarding consumer products, and by that, it's sort of the consumer use products. So if you're interested in learning about whether a chemical is in consumer products that are largely exposed to children, we have that under our exposure area of the dashboard, where you can look something like that up and determine if this is something that would be a concern for a susceptible population. We have many links to other agency websites and public data resources. We're also able to do literature searches for chemicals using public resources through the dashboard, and I'll show an example of that. We have batch searching for thousands of chemicals, and this can be done if in a variety of ways, and I'll again show an example of that. There's been updates to that since the last year. It's also downloadable open data for reuse and repurposing. As I mentioned earlier, we wanted this to be not only publicly accessible, but as transparent as possible, so that the data could be used and would be available publicly for use by our stakeholders, as well as our agency partners. And again, there's many other features. I'm only able to highlight a few today, and we're happy to do follow-up conversations. There's more information at the link at the bottom of this slide. That's sort of a general web page with some of the background. It also has sort of a walkthrough on how to use the dashboard. I'd say it's not so much a user manual, but it's similar to that. But so you could go there and then link to the dashboard from there. Sorry, next slide. So this is what you would come to with the home page. If you go to the link at the bottom of this page, that'll bring you right to the CompTox Chemicals Dashboard. As mentioned, it has about 875,000 chemicals. You could plug in a chemical name of interest. You could put in a CAS number. You'll see if, as you type that in, you'll get a pull-down list of similar chemicals if you use just one word to try and pull that up. You can also look at different product and use categories and assay genes, or genes specifically for that. So just to walk through, like I said, as a user of the dashboard, the first time I came to that screen I just showed you, and I typed in a chemical. We chose bisphenol A just because it has a lot of information, so that it's a good one to show and share. It opens up to this page, which is the detailed chemicals page. Since the last iteration in August of 2018, there have been some variations to this page based on, in large part, user comments that we've received, but also things that we had considered as we were building this the dashboard. So some of it is, there used to be a zoom feature on the figure here. I'm not sure if you can see my arrow, which a lot of users found distracting, and so we've pulled that out. Things like that, just to try and make the experience and the use of the dashboard more user-friendly and more available. To the left, you'll see the column, and this has been updated since, in August 2018, it was in development, but this is now out for the public use of the dashboard, is the list of options for the information you can pull from on your specific chemical of interest. So there's an executive summary on the first page, and that will highlight some of the main points on the chemistry, the hazard characterization, the exposure, et cetera. But as you can see, you can drill down even further on those, if you can read it, if your eyesight's a little bit better than mine, on the various aspects for environmental fate and transport, properties, ADME, exposure, and et cetera. And I'm going to dig into a few of those where we've had some updates in the past year so that you can see what these updates look like. So one of the things I had mentioned was the importance of data curation for the data that underlies the dashboard. One thing I forgot to mention is that what I'm showing today and what you see on the dashboard is obviously sort of a book cover to a lot of data and information. There's a large group of people that work on putting all of the aspects of this together, not only the researchers that come up with the data, but the bioinformaticians that pull everything together so that you can find what you're looking for when you go through this. The reference at the bottom of this slide is a reference to the paper about how we have been controlling the quality of sort of the chemical identification and structure association. So as many of you may know, there's times when CAS numbers are either not accurate or they're discontinued or they're for multiple chemicals. It's not clear based on the chemical name. So what we have done with this DSS Tox effort, the effort to control the quality of that structure association with chemical identification is, starting in 2004, we had done sort of manual curation, and now with these updates, we're doing manual and automated curation of the data. So what is highlighted at the bottom of this screen is on that first, detailed chemical page, you can pull down record information, and it will show you what level of curation the data quality has for this chemical. You can see for bisphenol A, as I mentioned, it's bisphenol A. It's a lot of data. It's been researched quite a bit, and so it has I think level 5 data curation, if I'm reading that right again, or level 1. Sorry, I have that backwards, which is expert curation, and it was performed. So that's sort of the highest level of data curation and data quality you could have. So you can check on that with your chemical of interest as you go through, and this has been updated in part related to the description of the data curation efforts in this paper cited at the bottom of the slide. So that is one of the newer updates from our March 2019 release. So I just wanted to show the properties page because I think this is an important aspect of it. One of the things for this recent update was just how the tables were set up. And again, related to just trying to be a little bit more user-friendly and to give the information to the users where they need it. So there's some things, and again, this is a slide and not a demo, but on the left here you can click on some of these highlighted properties and get some information about where this data came from or what it represents. And then as you can see, we have both experimental, as I mentioned, and predicted data for a variety of these properties for this chemical and for others. The next slide is just sort of combining that. You can also pull up, if you, again, tab to the left and look at the environmental fate and transport. It's similar. You can click on more information here on the various properties. We have the experimental and predicted data as well as others here in the summary. And you can drill down a little bit further on the data as you need to. But I just wanted to highlight that there are some changes in how this is set up and how you can pull the further information from those. And just the appearance, we hope, is a little bit more user-friendly, and you still are able to get the information needed from there. So the next tab, again, going over to the far left, you can see all the different options still for bisphenol A, and I've selected hazard. So under chemical hazard data, and this is, again, where I usually come for this sort of information when I work on assessments or review assessments or just looking into some chemicals. So the chemical hazard data, and I'm going to tab through a couple of the different screens, but what I wanted to highlight, and hopefully you can see up here on the left, is there's different data types under chemical hazard data. So as you pull this down and as you first look at it, you have the option of looking at toxicity values. You can look at points of departure, and I think the last one that I pulled up is screening level values. So just with this pull down menu here, you can look at a variety of different aspects of the data. The way this has been set up, again, we've kept sort of the structure of the chemical here at the top, which is a new feature with this version of the dashboard. And we also, you can get more information as you tab here, and if this were live, it would pop up some information for you when you click on that. A variety of information comes from a variety of different data sources. It includes, not just EPA data, but other data from various organizations, including states and other agencies. So, and lastly, I also want to note that it's not just human data. You can also click and get eco data as well. So I had mentioned that we also have sources of exposure to chemicals. So this slide here, again, since the update last year, we've again updated these tables as well to make it a little bit cleaner and a little bit more user-friendly. As with the others, you can click here and get more information about what this property or this product use category would be. Over to the left, there's some other options. I haven't pulled out all of them, but I think these are of greater interest depending on what you're looking for, as far as, are you looking for product use categories, or are you more interested in some of the monitoring of sort of the inventories of exposure that exist. This one, it happens to be toxic release inventory, but there are also others that you could pull up. And for this one, I wanted to highlight that what we're doing here now is we pull in exactly from the TRI website, so that this isn't anything necessarily de novo for the dashboard, but it pulls it all into one spot. So if you're in here looking at various issues related to exposure and you wanted to go to the TRI to see information on the toxic release, from the toxic release inventory, you could do it directly from here and not have to tab out and go to a different website. I think the last one I pulled up was we also have information on monitoring data. This is an example of some of the data we pull in from the NHANES survey, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. So this was just some examples. There's other aspects of the exposure work shown here as well that I did not pull up for our presentation today. One of the things that we've also added with this new version of the dashboard is that you can sort of pick your own preferred display. And one of, I'll just tab back to here. Generally, you can, and it's grayed out here, but you can download the data as you select things, and you can, oh, here it is over on this side. Download the data, and you can pick your own preferred display of how you want the data to be presented on these slides, and then in Excel. So the next slide is looking at what I think many of you might be familiar with is sort of the ToxCast data, looking at the in vitro bioassay screening. And so this is, again, for bisphenol A, it's a ToxCast summary. And as you know, we've done a lot of work in ToxCast with endocrine disruptors. So there's a lot of analysis and assays on bisphenol A. Some of the changes for this iteration are shown here. And again, one of the things we've been asked for in the past, not only from users but also from other organizations where the data is pulled in here, is to increase assay details. And so on the right, you can see on this graph, the graph of the chemical activity from the in vitro bioassays is information specific to the assay. For if you look in the middle, there's one point that's sort of circled. That's the data point that I have tabbed on for this screenshot, and it brings up all the assay details on the right. And many of these are now in the format of the OECD guidance document 211, which has specific requested information on not only the assay details, but sort of the domain of applicability, as it were, for that assay. And that information has been pulled in for many of these, and we're going to continue to do that to update that as well. The other thing to note here is for this imagery, I mean, the dots are color-coded based on the topics to the left here of the graph, so you can see what type of assay it is and where the bioactivity is showing up. So for one of the other updates to the dashboard is, and I'm sorry, I wanted to highlight for the previous slide, I'm just going back here briefly. This data as well is highlighted changes to the presentation of the data, but it's also the most recent update of sort of the ToxCast data, the in vitro database that we use. It's the most recent, I think it's version 3.1 at this point on here for this dashboard release. And so it's not only just the presentation that we've changed and the addition of details on the assays, but the underlying data has been updated and increased as well for this version of the dashboard. So going back to the similar compound slide, One of the other changes that we made was to update the sort of multiple search criteria here that you can see and how it's visually presented. If you're plugging in, again, this is the phenol A, and I selected over here similar compounds. Part of why you might do that is if you have a known chemical that you want to see what other, similar, obviously sort of a read across. If it's a known chemical with limited information and you want to see what other chemicals are similar in structure, you could use this to pull that up. And so you have a lot of options here as far as how you want to look at the data, but also what you want to do with it after you pull up this grouping of similar compounds. In this case, I think it's about 200 to 300. You can download the list as it is. You can go through and select each one individually. You can go through and look for specific ones and pick them and get detailed information on that compound itself. You can also take it and send it to batch searching, which I'll mention in a minute. We've had some updates to that as well. And as you can see at the top, there's some options of how you're searching and what lists or database you may be searching as well. So there's some changes to, again, not only the appearance to make it a little bit more user-friendly, but also the underlying data and what you can do with the information once it's shown here. So one of the other updates that we've included is we've increased the literature searching capabilities for the dashboard. I think this is something that I know in talking to users that they really like, that they can go through and take this chemical, and in this case, I selected, the topic area of female reproduction for the literature search, and under the abstract sifter, so under literature, you have the option of doing Google Scholar and a couple of other options. I chose the abstract sifter, and so what it does is goes through and looks for, with this chemical, with this CAS number, and information that's put into the query over on the right at the top of the screen. It'll search through abstracts to find that chemical, and you can go through and look. I think this is almost 2,000 abstracts. You probably don't want to go through and select each paper, but you can go through and either narrow the search terms a little bit you can edit that as you'd like to try and narrow it down. You can download it as shown over on the far right. You can download it into Excel. You can just select certain ones on the far left and tab in and just download those as well. Or you can click on the link, the PMID, and go directly to the abstract. One of the things that's sort of in process or in development for this is, and you can get to this from the download into Excel, is looking at, you can do a multiple chemical search as well. And so this is designed in sort of some default headers over on the right of this Excel spreadsheet, and has a heat map for one of the outputs to show you the number of abstracts with for that chemical with that endpoint, so whether it's gene tox or neurotox, reprotox. So it's just one way to see sort of the breadth. One of the things we've considered this for, at least in some of the work I've been doing, is you could use this again to look at data gaps, or also to look and say this clearly is an area, neurotox or devtox is an area that we need to look into more as far as what data is available and what literature is available. So that's something that is currently, if you go through the download, you can pull up this this heat map, but it's ongoing work, and so it will be, there's a publication near final that should be published soon, and we're happy to share that information that talks a little bit more about the work shown here. So I mentioned in the earlier slide too that we also have updated the links to outside sources. The underlying aspect of the dashboard is that it's linked to a lot of data sources that pulls in the data, the ToxCast data, but we also have, IRIS, and we have IARC, and have a bunch of other sort of databases that we can pull in, either toxicity values through our ToxVal database, or the, in vitro values for in vitro database. It pulls from a variety of different sources. This page here you get to when you're on your specific chemical of interest, and over on the far left there's a links option. And it's a list, and again, it might be a little small, but you can see that some are highlighted in blue, and those are the ones that there is information on bisphenol A under those links. The other ones are just they're available, and if data becomes available on bisphenol A, they will also be highlighted, so you can click on them directly. So you can see there's sort of general links, there's toxicology, analytical predictions, and publications. So you have a variety of different options here. I will say that, again, these are something that are updated. It's been updated with this dashboard update in March, and they're updated in part due to users who are looking for, again, that sort of first-stop shop. And if it's something that they often go to certain websites when they're looking into a specific chemical, then this is something that they were interested in having added to this page so that they could go directly to it with, again, without having to keep too many windows open and bouncing around too much. So I mentioned briefly the searching for more than one chemical, so the batch searching. So again, the appearance of this has changed a bit as well in relation to how the data is shown, how the options are shown here, but also how the data is output. For this, it shows that you would select, you type in into this area here, you can type in your chemical or chemicals, obviously if it's batch search. If you noted, like I just put bisphenol A out of habit, and then I added phthalates because I wanted to see what I could pull up from the class of phthalates. And so I didn't go to the next step for this, but what you can do is you can select, as you can see, everything to the left and below the download button. You can pick and choose what you would like to look for. Up above the download button, it's how you want to input the information in part, and then below that is what are the different types of information and results that you're looking for. And all of that can be downloaded to Excel, and you can look at that there. As I mentioned earlier when I was showing the similar compounds, you can take that whole list of similar compounds and click batch search, and it will input that in for you and bring you back to determine what type of information you'd be interested in for those chemicals as well. So this is, I'm getting close to the end of the screenshots for those of you that would rather have not see anymore. So this is a slide to show the list that I had mentioned. We've updated the list quite a bit since August of 2018. It includes, and by list, it's lists of various chemicals that are grouped or categorized in one way or another. And so some of them are, lists of chemicals that are in specific risk assessments. Or so for us, we have a list of our PPR-TVs or our IRIS assessments. You can look just to those to see if your chemical of interest has any of that information. It's also, you could have lists of, we have algal toxins, or we have PCBs, we have PFAS, which I'll show in a minute. We also have lists on here on TSCA, our Toxic Substance Control Act, not only their active inventory, but also the candidates that they're proposing that have been released for public comment for high priority candidates for prioritization or low priority candidates. So you can go in here and select any of those lists, or you can search over on the top right-hand side there. You can search for TSCA or PFAS and see what your options are for the various lists. Once you pull up a list, you can click on it and get further information and dig in deeper on the specific chemicals. So if I typed in PFAS for this list here, this is just one of 3 pages of different lists that we have. And so I think for those of you working in the PFAS area, which may be many of you, you're likely aware that we have a PFAS research strategy or toxicity analysis effort. And we started with phase one with 75 test samples. And so that's the first list you see here is, well, 74, but it was the first set started with 75 test samples. And those, you can click on that list and pull up just those 75. Phase two, set two, or phase two is right below that for the other 75. And then there's others based on the ones, related for the, the drinking water method or various aspects that we've been asked to sort of group together. I'm told that one of them is the full list that we have on here contains, oops. Sorry, I don't know if people can still see my slides. I just got a note saying connection lost. I'm trying to get back in. I don't know, Erin, if you...
Yeah, I can still see them.
Oh, you can? Okay. Well, let me just see what happens. All right.
Next slide if you need me to change.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry about that, everybody. So I think I was on the PFAS slide with the structures that were shown. So yeah, so we have, we think, the largest curated group of, like a compiled curated list of PFAS chemicals. It's about 6,000, I believe, but again, I can't read it because the slides aren't up. So, but again, thinking back to what I said about the batch searching and the information that you can pull from this, you can then take that list and either select ones looking at the structures that you're interested in, or you can select the whole set and have it downloaded, and then you can start digging in deeper into specific ones that you're interested in. And you can do multiple search criteria from that, whereas in the past it was a little bit more restricted. But so now one of the updates that we did specifically is to be able to do more of a search. So I was going to go to the next slide. I know it's a little weird because I can't see them. So it should be, make sure we're on the same page, Erin. It's the impact slide for California.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So one of the things, we wanted to go through and show the highlights to the dashboard, but we also wanted to talk a little bit how it's been used or how it could be used. And again, my ask from the beginning is to think about that as we go through. So this impact that we pulled, this is some work that was done by California Environmental Protection Agency evaluating chemicals for health effects in California. And so the challenge was to make informed decisions about the potential health effects of various chemicals. And the example I showed here is pesticide assessments. The solution was that ORD researchers, both from the National Center for Computational Toxicology and I believe the National Center for Environmental Assessment were also there, have provided California EPA staff with training on the use and interpretation of the chemical testing data within the CompTox Chemicals Dashboard. So a lot of those features and plots and things that I showed you that we walked through and did not only demonstration, but talked about how to interpret that data for their chemicals of interest. And Cal EPA uses this ToxCast data, specifically the bioactivity data that I had mentioned, to provide insight into how chemicals cause toxicity and to perform various state efforts on the life cycle analytics and the exposure modeling and monitoring. And again, the example shown on the right is a Cal EPA pesticide assessment where they use the ToxCast data for weight of evidence decisions related to the health effects of pesticides. Next slide. And is this, and again, I apologize, the next slide is the potential impact, correct? Or did I miss a slide in there?
Sorry, it's on evaluating chemicals for health effects.
Oh, okay, so that was the slide I just went through. I think I missed the slide on the TSCA, so I apologize for that. I'm sorry, I don't know why I lost connection. We're on the, which slide are we on?
Potential impacts for Minnesota.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll just go back to the TSCA one after. Again, I apologize, everybody. Sorry, I'm not sure what's going on. So this one is something that Minnesota has used some of the ORD tools, not necessarily the dashboard. And so if anybody from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency is on the call, I'm not trying to imply that you did use the dashboard. If you did, it would be good to know. But this is one that I was thinking about in terms of the potential use and the potential impact of the dashboard. So the MPCA, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, had a challenge of trying to characterize potential effects for a wide variety of contaminants for which there was limited information. And the solution was that they worked using a suite of EPA tools, including EpiSuite, EcoTox, and WebICE. And some of these are available on the CompTox Chemicals Dashboard. So it's not clear to me from the report if they use the dashboard or use the tools individually, but EpiSuite, there are some aspects of EpiSuite results that are on the dashboard. We also have a similar we have a similar model that the OPERA model, which can do similar predictions to EpiSuite in some cases. It uses structure-activity relationships to predict, chemical properties, toxicity, and some other aspects to, potential activity of the chemical. So something like that could also have been used. Not to say it has some slightly different qualities than EpiSuite, but and then EcoTox is also available. The data from that is available through the dashboard. And so the work that MPCA had done would use the ORD tools, but my question, again, going back to the ask at the beginning, is if using the dashboard may have brought either more information in, or if it was even considered, and if there were reasons why it was thought that it may not be the best option to work with, because we could learn more from the users in that case as well if there are changes that might have made it more helpful. And then, Erin, if I can go back to, I guess it's slide 25 maybe, the TSCA slide. It just says impact at the top.
Yeah, that's 24. We're on that.
Okay, thank you. So this is an impact within the use of the dashboard in the EPA, and so I'm sure many of you are familiar with the amendment to the Toxic Substances Control Act from June 2016, and part of that was not only changes to the risk evaluations under TSCA for existing chemicals and some other aspects there, but also encouragement and requirement to use and consider alternative testing methods. And so the challenge for us with TSCA was the need to identify a subset of both data-rich and data-poor compounds as possible candidates for prioritization under TSCA. And so the solution, in part, was to use the CompTox Chemicals Dashboard, which, as we've discussed, integrates a lot of different data sources and data information that could be used to help inform potential candidates for prioritization. And so the example shown here is the TSCA's working approach for identifying potential candidate chemicals for prioritization. This was released last September, September 2018. What it has, and I don't know if you're not familiar with it, it has a short-term and long-term options for approaches to select or identify candidates for prioritization. The longer-term option was included using the dashboard, using tiered decision workflows that would pull in data from the dashboard to help address various scientific domains related to different endpoints like genotoxicity, carcinogenicity, susceptible populations, eco-hazard and human health hazard, and others. And so this, again, was released in last September, and as part of this, there's an effort to further define and sort of clarify how this dashboard could be used to help with this effort to identify potential candidates for prioritization. So I think going to my last slide, the conclusion slide, basically I hope walking through today not only showed some of the highlights of the CompTox Chemicals Dashboard, which has access to increased numbers of chemicals, 875,000 at this point. It has multiple modules and tools that support different environmental applications. Data release is twice a year at present and supported by manual and automated curation efforts. Updates released in both March and August of 2019. I focused on some of the March ones, but some of those are also shown here. But with the new bioacid data was August of 2019, the DB version 3.1. And then additional toxicity data and focus data efforts on the PFAS chemical list and properties. So I think my last slide after that is just a list of contacts. Tony Williams is sort of the dashboard architect, as we call it. And then Monica Lindenbrink is our deputy director, acting deputy director, and then myself as a senior science advisor, all for the National Center for Computational Toxicology. Our contact information is listed because we're available for if you would like a webinar for your group, or if you want a demonstration or anything we can do in that area, we'd be happy to connect with you and follow up. But thank you. I think that's it for my slides, I hope. I'm sorry again for the technical